Welcome back, everyone, to Issues of Faith. We have as our guest Dr. John Mark Hicks. He is professor of theology at Lipscomb University, talking about what we can learn from the 1918 Spanish flu with where we are in this pandemic. And of course, we had Dr. John Mark Hicks on at the start of this pandemic, and I'm really happy to have him back. And it's fair to say churches thrived after the 1918 Spanish flu. They did some of the same things we're doing now. They shut down. They became hospitals, as you've said. They did some specific things. They thrived. As we've talked about, there's some churches that are concerned about what's going to happen after this pandemic. What, in your opinion, do they need to do to thrive after this pandemic?
Yeah, let me go back to that 1918 and then move forward with your question. When we see how churches thrived after the 1918 pandemic, it's primarily or partly what the churches did and what the message of the churches was when they were encountering the pandemic, that they saw themselves as one with humanity and struggling against this, and being community as struggling against it, and helping the community and being compassionate with the community. Even though there were forces that objected to different things. And I think when we look at how we come out of this pandemic as a church, we got to decide what kind of church we're going to be. Who are we as church? Are we church primarily as building and ritual, or are we church primarily as community? A community that cares for one another and cares for the others, and finds the ways to do church that are not fundamentally building focused, but ways to do church that are community focused, not only outreach or outside of our community, but internally to our community. Do we have ways of being with one another that are other than Sunday morning? Do we have ways of reaching out to others and being compassionate to others that are not just what we do on Sunday morning? In other words, are we going to continue to be kind of an attractional religion where we're just, yeah, come to our building, you'll like it? Or are we going to be a more missional faith that says we're joining God in what God is doing in the world, and we're going to join God's mission in the world? And that means we're going to be compassionate and caring, we're loving, and we're going to be welcoming and accepting, and we're going to be helping people and serving people. I think it's, what kind of church are we going to be when we come out of this pandemic? In 1918, I think generally speaking, always exceptions, so this is the generalization, generally speaking, it was a compassionate, helping church. And the pandemic gave opportunity to be that. And it was disconnected from the political structures and disconnected from the partisanship that may have existed. That's going to be the challenge coming out of this pandemic, is the response of the church is often perceived, whether rightly or wrongly, we're talking about perceptions, is often perceived as partisan and self-interested. And I'm not going to wear a mask because I don't have to wear a mask. And when people who are not a part of the Christian faith hear Christians talking about their liberty to not wear a mask, that's heard quite differently than they intend it to be heard. It's heard as, oh, you don't care about people. You just care about your liberty. Whether that should be heard that way or not is that's a debatable point, but that's the way it will be heard. And I think that's going to be the problem for the church in coming out of this pandemic. So we're going to have to, it seems to me, be very focused about undermining that image and being proactive in community, in service to others, in feeding the hungry and clothing and helping the unemployed. And that's going to be the call. And I think what the church does ultimately, whether it declines or whether it blossoms, that's going to be a large part of it.
What you're saying, I think, is fascinating, and I'm also a little concerned by it. Because what you're saying is the church has to come out of this, I hear what you're saying is, and not be seen as too political. And in the world we're in now, everything you do, even when you're trying not to be political, I feel like can be interpreted in some way as being political. And so the church is in a very tough spot here.
Yeah, I think I would want to say the church is political in the sense that the church has a politic. The kingdom of God has a politic, and it's a politic that is compassionate to the poor, is speaks for justice and bears witness to justice. So the church needs to be faithful to its own politic and speak to the ethics of the kingdom of God. But what happens is that when the church speaks, it takes on the veneer and maybe even soaks it into its core, the partisanship that is part of the culture. And that's when the message gets distorted.
We only have about a minute.
Clarify.
Yeah, we only have about 2 minutes left. And you talk about building focused. Do you feel like churches have become too building focused? And maybe this is an opportunity when we're worshiping remotely that we can maybe break away from that, or that kind of hits at community. I guess the building focused issue. What about that?
Yeah, the building focus is sometimes that attractional model. Hey, come to our building. We're going to do church and we're going to do religious rituals, which I am wonderful with. I love it. I miss it. So I don't want to downplay that at all. But there's a real consideration here that there's an opportunity to learn from this moment how we can do church online, how we can do church in the park, how we can do church in our homes. And that we've experienced that now, and there are some values that come from that don't come necessarily from just being in a building. If we reduce church to the building and to that Sunday morning service or to just being together, then we've missed the mission of Jesus. We've missed what it means to be a disciple of Jesus and what Jesus has called us into. So there's a real opportunity to learn how to do church well, not excluding the building or the worship assembly, but recognizing that that's just a part of it, and that maybe what our culture needs is to hear Christians talk about the other, not just come to the building, but, hey, join me in serving the poor. Join me in standing up for justice. Join me in these kingdom ethic projects, and then let's worship together.
I could talk to you a lot longer. Dr. John Mark Hicks, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it. And I hope that you're coming on at the end of the pandemic. I hope we had you on at the beginning of the pandemic and the end. So
I hope that's true, but I think we got another 6 months or so, more than likely.
A little longer. All right. Well, thank you.
Certainly pray.
And thanks to all of you for watching Issues of Faith.